Chapter 26, A Curtain of Iron. Britain's great wartime leader, Winston Churchill, had something to say, but no one was listening. So, in 1946, when President Truman asked the former Prime Minister to speak at tiny Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, Churchill didn't hesitate. He said yes. Churchill wanted to talk about Russian communism. Many people did not know what to think about Stalin and Soviet Russia. During World War II, which ended in 1945, Russia was the ally of Britain and the United States. No people fought harder against the Nazis than the Russians. No nation suffered war losses as enormous as Russia's. When the war ended, everyone hoped for friendship between the new superpowers, Russia and America. Around the world, many people believed that Russian communism was an acceptable form of government. Winston Churchill thought differently. Churchill had warned of Adolf Hitler and Nazism long before most Britons or Americans took them seriously. Once again, he wanted to tell the world of a dangerous dictator and an ominous form of government. A shadow has fallen upon the scene so lately lighted by the Allied victory, he said, at that small Missouri college. The shadow he was talking about was vicious totalitarian rule. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent, Churchill continued. The continent Churchill was referring to was Europe. The iron of curtain was blocking out truth and freedom. Nations behind that curtain were prisoners of Russia. When World War II ended, the armies of the winning Allied powers, the US, the USSR, and Great Britain, moved through Europe, freeing the nations that had been conquered by Hitler's Nazis. The Allies promised to help the liberated nations. They promised to help them hold open elections and form free governments. After that, the Allied armies were supposed to leave, which is what we did. Russia wouldn't go. Soviet armies stayed in control in Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and East Germany. There were no free elections there. Elsewhere, in nations like Italy and France, the communist parties were growing strong. Joseph Stalin bragged that the whole world would eventually go over to communism. But most people didn't stay behind the Iron Curtain willingly. Armed guards stood at every Soviet border. Iron curtains would soon extend over several Asian countries. Some East European countries like Hungary and Yugoslavia attempted to rebel and become independent. The Hungarians were crushed and their leaders killed. The president of Yugoslavia, Marshal Tito, was as crafty as Stalin himself, and he managed to keep the Soviet Union at an arm's length. But even Yugoslavia was not really a free country. It had only one political party, and that was communist. In an address to Congress, President Truman said, "I believe that it must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressure. To subjugate is to conquer or bring under control." Truman decided the United States would come to the aid of any nation endangered by communism. We would not let Soviet Russia expand further. We began by sending $400 million in emergency aid to Greece and Turkey. That program of assistance was called the Truman Doctrine. The idea behind the Truman Doctrine was to keep communism from spreading. That policy was known as containment. It was the beginning of a Cold War against Russia. The Cold War lasted more than 40 years. Why a Cold War? Because the United States and the Soviet Union did not directly engage each other in a hot war, a war with shooting and bloodshed. The tense 40-year standoff between the superpowers is known as the Cold War. Although the Soviet Union and the United States never directly fought each other, battles did take place in countries where people allied themselves with one superpower or the other. Germany divided. At the end of World War II, the Soviets occupied eastern Germany, while Britain, France, and the United States occupied the western portion of the country. Just as Germany was divided, so was Berlin its capital. The city of Berlin was located more than 100 miles inside the Soviet-dominated part of Germany. Stalin wanted to drive the Americans and their allies out of the western half of the city. In June 1948, he ordered a blockade of West Berlin. Without supplies, West Berlin's people would soon face starvation. Stalin hoped his blockade would bring the entire city under Soviet control. In response to the Soviet blockade, the British and Americans organized a massive airlift of food and other supplies. In the Berlin airlift, as the rescue operation is known, more than 277,000 flights delivered more than 2.3 million tons of supplies to West Berlin. Because of the difficult flying conditions, 73 Allied airmen lost their lives in the course of the Berlin airlift. In May 1949, Stalin lifted the blockade. In the same year, Germany was divided into two countries. The western part became a separate democratic nation, the Federal Republic of Germany, often called West Germany. The eastern part of Germany became the German Democratic Republic, often called East Germany, with East Berlin as its capital. Despite its name, East Germany was far from democratic. The Communist Party controlled the government and took its directions from the Soviet Union. In 1961, the Russians built a concrete wall in the middle of the city of Berlin and topped it with barbed wire to keep people in the eastern half from fleeing to the west, Berlin, and freedom.